Okay, we're starting a shir now on next shir on העזר. Have a lot to catch up on, so we're having 2 or maybe 3 shurim this week to catch up to where we're holding. They're not long shurim, but go through the Nekudas today. We're going to go through Siman and Ches, and Siman Samach Aleph we will do on Tuesday, Mirz Hashem. The Siman that we learned until now are basically focused on Kedushin. In the Dunya, that all comes before Nisuin. The next step after Kedushin comes Nisuin. In the past, Kedushin and Nisuin were two separate things. They might have been done with a hefsek between them. There was a certain amount of time between the Kedushin and the Nisuin, between the Erusin and the Nisuin. Today it is done one after another with a hefsek of a few minutes, pretty much. After Kiddushin before Nisuin, she's considered a arusa. Arusa means she's asura l'bayla. But how long is she asura l'bayla? So long as she is in her parents' house. That's the lashon of the mechaber, calls as long as shehi bevei savir, that she's in her father's house. That doesn't mean as long as she is in her father's house. That means that she has to, once she moves out, she automatically becomes Nasua. It rather means that so long as she's not going into her husband's property, that he doesn't bring her into her property, into his property, then she is considered Arusa and not Nasua. There's a machlokes if the isur of being with an Arusa is a isur mid'Rabbanan or isur mid'Oraisa. If being with an Arusa before Nasua. There's also, so that's the way that is understood this from the mechaber. It seems like pretty clear that it's only mid'Rabbanan. Not only is she asur, are they asura b'bia between them, they're also asurim in yichud. Therefore, the Ramah points out to you right away in the beginning of Siman on Hey, if you see an arus and arusa go having yichud, misyachid, right away say birchas chasanim, and at least you'll do and they'll become nasuim. Yeah. Why is yichud aser? Now we say it yichud, even yichud is aser. Well, simple reason, the same reason why yichud is aser bichlal. Yichud is aser when there is a chashash that is going to be bia, which is aser. In this scenario, since the bia is aser, whether mid'Rabbanan or mid'Oraisa, then the isur of yichud applies. Now, if it's asur for a arusa, it's obvious that it's asur if it's only hiskala meshudeches loy, it's only a shidduch. If she's not even meshudeches loy, like every other pnuya. By meshudeches is like a pnuya. Arusa she's asura for a different reason. A pnuya is anyways asur. So same thing, whether it's a shidduch or not, the isur of yichud applies in all scenarios, and even more so, the more close they are, the bigger of an issue the yichud becomes. The Piskei Halachis on Even-Ezer points out that this whole discussion whether the isur of being isur yichud, whether it's a isur d'Rabbanan or isur d'Oraisa, was only a question in the time of the Gemara, or even later, when the pnuyas were toivel as a regular basis to be tired. But today, even once it became a minhag that only the married people go to mikveh, and they're only toivel in dasa. So any pnuya is for sure a nideh. So therefore, the isur yichud applies mid'Oraisa to arusasai, the meshudeches, to everyone across the board. So he says the whole discussion whether isur yichud is the Rabbanan or the Oraisa is completely irrelevant in today's day and age. Now, the Ramah says, do Sheva Brachas right away when you see Yichud between an Arus and a Arusa. Obviously, we know, if you learned the halachas, that the Sheva Brachas is not what creates the marriage, not what creates the Nisuin. Chupa is what creates the Nisuin, not Sheva Brachas. Elamai, being that they're in the same place, you could say that it's one property, and it became as if he brought her into his property. So therefore, the concept of yichud / chuppah already happened, and therefore the chuppah idea is there. So we say the idea of chuppah is there. Make the brachas, and you're good to go. That's the Chalakas Mechaykik explains it over there. Or, being that there's yichud, we are chayshesh that yichud doesn't end with yichud, it ends with bia. And if it ends with bia and it's not beveis chamiv, and it's in a different place, say it's probably l'shem nisuin, and therefore might have created the nisuin already, so might as well do the sheva brachas. Chuppah, because chuppah essentially,
What was the second beer? The Gemara Chuppah only wants to do beer.
Chuppah is we're chayshish there already was a bia done. If they're misyached, we're chayshish the bia is happening. So therefore we say a bia is done. That creates nisuin in this scenario. Whether it's mutter or asr, it's a separate discussion. And the chuppah, sachako, the chuppah and the yichud, the whole concept of what chuppah is, which we're soon going to discuss, is only a introduction to what comes afterwards, which is bia. And therefore, if chuppah is moyel, alachas kama v'kama, that bia itself is moyel, because chuppah is only like, whatever chuppah is only like something similar to bia, but bia for sure does the nisuin. That's the Chalakas Mechaykik in the Beis Shmuel points out, and therefore, if you see once there's yichud, they say the sheva brachas. Now, it's very important to point out that Shulchan says that this whole discussion is also irrelevant today, because that's also only talking about in the time when kiddushin was done at one point, and chuppah and nisuin was done sometime down the line. So when you have nisuin, kiddushin, and then nisuin, and then you see the yichud between the kiddushin and nisuin, you could start having a discussion whether that counts as nisuin. But again, in today's day and age, when kiddushin and nisuin are done one right after another, essentially at the same time, with a small hefsek between them, so therefore it is asur to have bia before kiddushin. And Samruz, we're not going to start saying that the bia was the one that created the kiddushin because of the yichud. So if you're just going to jump and say brachas when two people who didn't even have kiddushin, or nisyached, you're going to have nisuin before kiddushin, it's not going to work. So that doesn't work today. This concept of that yichud automatically means bia. If it was done before kiddushin, it does not create, as Aruch HaShulchan says, it does not create this concept of nisuin that would have been created in a scenario that the Shulchan Aruch is talking about, where there was already kiddushin and the only thing that's missing is nisuin. So the only thing that's missing is nisuin. You make a chuppah, which a chuppah is essentially just like yichud before bia, so bia for sure works, but not in today's day and age. Becomes a whole discussion. Let's say they have bia. So the first bia was Hashem Kiddushin, right? Let's say the Kaddish b'bia. And now she is going back to her parents' house. So there's only Kiddushin, there's no Nisuin. After the first bia that was done Hashem Kiddushin, if she goes back to her parents' house, she's an Arusa, she's not a Nesua, she's usher to him a second bia. Because there was no Nisuin. It's usher. Until they make a chuppah afterwards.
Why can't it be both?
The question is, if it's going to be in the house over there and continue, because one bia only works for kiddushin. You want to do a second bia, maybe?
The first deal of works in Kedushin is not is also Rabban also.
The Rabbanan says put a chelim on somebody who makes mekadosh with bia.
But I'm saying,
Or it works.
this type Baal Rishas is would that would take care?
No, that only happens to be afterwards kedushin. Before you stamashekets, and then you made kedushin. Now after kedushin, I'll be with Yarus until there's a chuppah. And what is a chuppah? A chuppah is a whole machlokes rishonim. What means a chuppah? I think you heard it already in the past. I'm going to go through it quickly. The Mechaber takes the position of the Rambam that a chuppah, the concept of a chuppah includes 3 elements. First of all, you have to bring her into your house. That is called the preparation. 2. Then you have to, so to speak, separate her from the world. She should be yours. And then yichud in a place which is roi lebia. Doesn't have to be a full-fledged, doesn't have to be bia, but and the Mechaber says, and this yichud is what is called knisa lechuppah, is called chuppah. That means it's not the first part which is bringing into your house, and it's not the yafrishena, it's the yichud, and that's the yichud which is entering the chuppah, and that same yichud is what is considered nisuin. And doesn't have to be mamish his own house. Doesn't have to be a house that he owns. Rather, it has to be a place where yichud and the bia normally occur. So it could be a hotel room or anything else along the way where that would happen. Now, what kind of yichud? Where does this yichud work? According to the Beis Shmuel, it has l'chatchila at least. It has to be a place which is roi lebia, a place which has the qualifications to be roi lebia. That means there's nobody there, etc., and that's the place which is roi lebia. That's the Beis Shmuel explains the chatchila. The Bach and the Chelkas Mechaykek say that it doesn't mamish have to be a place that's roi lebia. It could be a place that's even if there's a few people drinking over there, it's still considered enough for the purpose of yichud to make a nisuin. No, you don't need beds, no. For the same reason why cheder yichud works even in a place which is full of books, even though it's also to do bia over there according to Shulchan Aruch, until you put the curtains.
According to the Bach, such a scenario would be, let's say people are usher in this yachid, would that be the yichud as well?
It's not osur misyachid, it's osur for bia.
We need a yichud
in a place which is roi lebia. That place is roi lebia, just doesn't have curtains. So you'll put the curtains up.
He said a few people nearby.
Oh, that doesn't work for the Bach. I mean, it works for the Bach, it doesn't work for the Beis Shmuel says that chatchila shouldn't be. According to Bach, has to be just at mokim tzenua. The Beis Shmuel says that chatchila, the Pesach Tshuva brings, the chatchila should be a place which is mamish roi lebia with nobody else there. That's how we follow the Maisa. That's what we do. The way we do cheder yichud is a place where there's nobody in there.
How is it considered yichud?
How
is it considered yichud?
The Bach says it doesn't have to be mamish mokim that's completely enclosed at roi lebia. It has to be a mokim tzanut. You already bring her into your property. The Chelkas Mechaykek and the Aruch HaShulchan say that according to the Mechaber, if she's planning on going back to her parents' house after the chuppah, because they don't have an apartment yet or whatever it is, then it is still it doesn't work. It does not work. The nisuin don't kick in because there is no yafrishena. The concept of yafrishena, to separate her from the world, means separating her from her parents' house and bringing her into your own house. That doesn't happen if she's going right back to her parents' house, even if she's not going back to her parents' house the same night. But the plan is to go back and move back into her parents' house shortly thereafter. Chuppah nida to go back to her parents' house. Shaila and chuppah nida, that's the whole discussion.
He's already separated her from the world by Shas Kedusha.
No, separate her for yourself. Take her, bring her into for himself. Yeah.
But she's already separated.
Separate from the whole shasura to the world. Yeah. What is chuppah according to the Ramah? The Ramah brings the three shittas of Rishonim on this matter. The first shitta is that she has to be brought into his property. Bring her into his property, which is just yichud, and that is already what constitutes as a chuppah. And it doesn't have to be specifically his own personal house, but a place which was prepared for the purpose of this marriage. And that could even be in her parents' house. That means if there's a room that was dedicated specifically for the yichud in her parents' house, it's still considered, and he brings her into that room, it's still considered as a chuppah according to this opinion. Happens to be this is a machlokes, but if you look in the Tzemach Tzedek, and Tzemach Tzedek Shas Tshuvos and Even Ha'ezer Siman Kuf Yud Daled and Kuf Tes Vav, the story over there was that there was a young girl who got married. She was aktana. She got married to somebody with chuppah and kiddush, and her parents were divorced. Her father boycotted the wedding and was busy giving attitude that he would never agree to it. The wedding party was in her father's house.
Who married her off?
That's the whole first 14 seifim of that tshuva, is how does that work? But I'm not focusing on the end of it. We'll skip that part about the Ketana. Anyways, the husband disappeared and left her in Aguna, and talking about years later. And her father is saying, I never agreed that she should get married. And there's a whole discussion in the Gvia Seidus that the statement on the day of the wedding was supposed to be in his house. And it was in his house, he just wasn't there, the father's house. And the mother of the girl and her husband, that means the stepfather of the girl, was trying to convince the father of the girl to agree, and the certain statements that he said that might have implied that he did agree to it or didn't fully agree to it. And Tzemach Tzedek goes through the first, the whole bulk of the tshuva is about this discussion if the kiddushin, if there was an agreement from the father of the girl that she should get married. And over there towards the end of Siman Kuf Yudalid, it says over there that the fact that the wedding happened in his house, have a chazak uraya that he agreed that the wedding should happen. So that solves that problem after a whole long discussion. Siman Kuf Tezvav discusses the other point, which is what I wanted to bring out over here, that even though there wasn't a yichud in her father's house, mikol mokim al kol panim yesh lehachzik shehoya nisuin v'chupa midas ha'av kevon shenichnesu lebeisoi l'shem nisuin. They were brought into his house for the purpose of nisuin. That means he did not bring her into, the chassan did not bring her into his own house, he brought her into her father's house. That was a place that was set up for the nisuin, and it still worked. Therefore, the Tzemach Tzedek says b'cheskas eish midei, and the Chazon Ish mentions not the Tzemach Tzedek, but he says that that's what's the mashmos of the Gra also, but the concept is that it doesn't have to be specifically a place that belongs to the husband, rather a place that was dedicated for this specific purpose, and he brings her into that place. That already creates the concept of a chuppah. When the chuppah is done, usually the chuppah is done, at least in the olden days it was done in the chatzar of the shul, and there's a discussion what is the effect of this chuppah. The Gra writes that the chuppah is his kinyan. By him bring her into the chuppah, coming to the chuppah, the chatzar of the shul, he's koine her in that, he's koine by that action already, he's koine, he doesn't have to do any further action of purchasing the place of the chuppah. Huh? The what? It's all the chumrah. Yeah. And that's why it's mashma, sai from the Gra and sai from the Tzemach Tzedek, that there is, that really if a chuppah, if the chassan did not pay for the chuppah or did not pay for the cheder yichud, it's still considered kosher. Because the mere fact that it brings it to a place which was set up for this purpose, even though it's not his, it still works. So the Chashulchan says no, that you actually have to, that if you want to affect that, just the fact that it goes into the chuppah is not enough to show that he brought her into her own place.
Instead he's saying this l'chumra from the Chuvitz mashma.
L'chumra.
Or he's saying it l'chatchila.
Tzedek says that that's why she's a surah eshes ish. 10 years after, Tzemach Tzedek was looking to be mekel, not to be machmer, still had to say that. That means the fact that Tzemach Tzedek says went to such an extreme is l'chumra. But could you look at it every situation? It means you make it an eshes ish l'chumra based on that. It doesn't mean that you don't have to. I didn't say that I didn't make here an announcement that you don't have to. Halacha according to Tzemach Tzedek is you don't have to pay for chuppah and the cheder yichud. That's not what I said. I said that if it was not done, it still definitely still works.
Where is this from?
On the place, al-asar. The second shita that the Rama brings is that even if he brings her, that he didn't bring her into his own house, he brought her stamped to that they put that thing on their heads together. That's already when they did the birkas nisuin. That's already enough to create that. That's what's considered the act of nisuin. They put a talus or something on both. The second shit and the Rama. And the third shit is that it's enough with if the basula goes out with a hinuma. We do all the above to be yotze all the shittas. Comes that question. So according to some opinions, according to Moshe Sternbuch, he writes in one of his chuvas that being that we want to be yotze all the shittas, and that's what the Rama says, and that's why we also do the hinuma, which means the badeken. So the same Eidim that are at the cheder yichud, the Eidim yichud have to be present at the time of the badeken, because that's all part of the same process. The same Eidim are going to be by the chuppah, by the cheder yichud, and by the badeken, and that way because then it kicks in l'mafreya. That's how he explains it. Then when the chuppah happens after Kedushin, the hinuma kicks in l'mafreya. But the Aruch HaShulchan, it's clearly says that it's only achana, and therefore, and that's how we pass on the mice, and that's why we don't have to have the Eidim. The Eidim Yichud do not have to be at the badeken. The Rama concludes today the word chuppah is used for 4 poles and a piece of cloth on top of it. And the chassan and kala are brought into there in front of everybody else, and you make kiddushin, and then you do brachas erusin and nisuin, and then he brings her into his house, and the minhag is that she goes in first. That's not written in the Rama, but it's written already, old minhagim, that she goes in first into the house, and they eat something over there, and that way you're yotze all the 3 opinions that the Rama brings. That is yichud, hinuma, and all the opinions are solved with that, according to the Rama.
Kala has to go first.
Yeah.
They're not going to do that in a lot of chasnas over there.
It says in Sefer Minhagim also, no? The state. She goes first over the spoon. If the next sif in the Mechaber is the Birkas, if there was only a Birkas Chasanim, that means the brachas were done but there was no Yichud, then she is considered Narusa and she's not a Nesua, because the brachas by themselves do not create a Nisuin. there has to be the chuppah, whatever the chuppah means. According to the Mechaber, the chuppah means all three things, and according to the Ramah, there's 3 different opinions what chuppah means. But brachas alone, without any form of chuppah, which according to Mechaber means yichud, she becomes a arusa. And if he does yichud afterwards, it seems from the Chalkas Mechaykik that you don't have to do the brachas again. The brachas b'diavad work, even though the brachas birkas chasanim are supposed to happen afterwards, but poyel it's supposed to happen then. It still works. Now, what happens in Sif Gimel happens if it's the other way around, that there was a chuppah but there was no brachas. And the Mechaber says that she's Nesuah, she's considered married, it's not a problem. The Nesuin happened, because that's the Ikar. But there's still a chiyuv of the brachas, and therefore the chiyuv of the brachas could be done even sometime afterwards. The Mechaber says, Achar Kama Yomim. The Sefer HaMakne on Kedushin, on the halachas, brings over here a whole discussion. What does Kama Yomim mean? You could either say it means only during the days of Sheva brachas, you could say it means up to 30 days, or you could say it means up to 12 months, but definitely not after 12 months, because after 12 months there's no more the concept of Asimcha B'Moina. He does not give a maskana. He just says it could be either or. So according to the shortest svara would be only during Sheva brachas. So if somebody forgets to do these brachas, or for whatever reason, make sure that it's done within Sheva brachas. But that is for the brachas. The brachas could be done afterwards. Only brachas of birkas chasanim, not birkas elusin. Birkas elusin has to be done before, and therefore it will not work to do birkas elusin after nesuin. The ksuba has to be written before the chuppah, and if the ksuba is not written before the chuppah, it's asur to be mesyached, the chasan and the kala, and according to Mashmos and the Ramah, it may be yichud. It's the chatchila for sure is yichud, but even maybe at least isur to be together. Not only yichud. Today we follow that if there's no ksuba, then there are asurim beyichud if the ksuba was not done. I had an interesting story recently where there was a person who.
So who says that they can't be together?
No, it says yichud. Yichud. Some people say it's not. I forgot which opinion it is. That it's not yichud mamash. If they didn't do the ksuba yet, the yichud is not asur. Only bia is asur. Had a story recently of a person that I dealt with, a person that his mother converted Shalei Halacha, and he went and he did a gir. He married somebody who she herself converted Shalei Halacha. And both of them are convinced that they are Yidden. Then down the line they became Frum. So you understand that the Gerus was not Halacha because he was not Frum, his mother was not Frum either, she converted Shalei Halacha. And he married a woman who also converted Shalei Halacha, and she also wasn't Frum. They became Frum throughout the years, and then at some point they became Frum and they decided they want to do a Giyur. But they went to Eretz Yisrael, and they convinced this private Bezdin that it's a Giyur l'chumra. It's not a real Giyur. Why? Because they come from a place where there's no conservatives, no reform. They're all worthless gators. This little Bez in Israel didn't know anything about it, didn't know better. Did it the Giyur l'chumra. Giyur l'chumra. All they did was to do a ring, just to do Kiddushin again. But they didn't make a new ksuva. They didn't make a new nothing, because they had a chuppah a long time ago based on this guy. But be'etzem, she was definitely a goy according to halacha, and he was probably a goy according to halacha. And now, 6 or 7 years later, I happened to meet them, and we met them, and it's like you never got a new ksuba. They still had the old ksuba. They had to redo a ksuba. I didn't want to pass them to have to do a ksuba right away, but I did speak to Rav, and the Rav tells me to make a ksuba right away. Came a shayla, what kind of ksuba do you write for them? When do this chayvasin start from? So I don't know the maskana what happened. I left it to the Rav to discuss with another Rav who was mumcha in ksubas how exactly to write it. I didn't have exact achra whether you write, when do you write the ksuba. If you can't write a ksuba there, because ksuba was never lost. It was never ksuba to begin with. And ksuba d'shtakach b'tos you also can't write. So you have to think of a creative nusach, how to write a ksuba now for something which happened, the kiddushin doch happened. They did not have a chuppah, they had Eidim, and then had Yichud. I don't know if they had Yichud with Eidim. Let everybody.
Maybe you can write it from now, they never have chuppah.
They lived together, there was a lot more than one Bir L'Shem Kedushin and one Bir L'Shem Nisuin afterwards. In their mind, they were already married.
What about the Jews status?
No, that's fine, they did a full gear, it's not a problem. That is the points I want to point out on סימן נ"ה. I'll move to סימן נ"ח, a totally different topic. And then when we go to סימן סמ"ך א', which goes back to what סימן נ"ה is talking about, we're not going to go to סמ"ך א'. Then we're going to go to סימן נ"ח, which is the obligation of a father to pay for his children's weddings. The Chachamim made a takana that the father has to give part of his nechasim to his daughter. So, she should buy clothing, whatever it is, so she should be able to get married. And the reason the Gemara says is, Pashut, a guy does not want to marry a girl who has nothing. So give something to your daughter, so she should be more of marriageable material. And there's a certain minimum amount which you're going to get to soon what the minimum amount is. If he's poor, if he's rich, says you have to give as much kafi ashrei. What happens if he doesn't have that amount that he has to give? So what is the amount? If he's a poor person, how much does he have to give? The Chalkas Mechaykik and the Beis Shmuel over here point out you have to give enough clothing for the summer, enough clothing for the winter, which basically means clothing for 12 months. According to in the Beis Yosef, if you look in the Beis Yosef, it seems to imply that it means what's considered regular to wear during the year in that place, what a regular person, a regular woman would wear in that place during 12 months. Which essentially means that in a certain communities, a sheitel is also included in that. That is for ani. That's the minimum the ani has to do. And if he does not have, the first of the Bach says that you koife him to pay. What happens if he doesn't have? So the Shas Tshuvas Az Nidberu says in Siman Nun Aleph that this kind of, does he have to go into chayvus or not? He says that kind of question is really a question which belongs in the 5th chelik of Shulchan Aruch. So he's not going to mamish make a psak on it. But he says he doesn't think that he could find a mocker to say that the father has a chiyuv to take on debt to be able to marry off his to give her these clothing to be able to marry her off. But it just means he really has to work. He really has to work hard on it. If the father is not alive, the obligation goes to the grandfather, the father of the father. So is this
even for a daughter that's a begettes or stafka?
There's a tshuva from the Tzemach Tzedek that the Tzemach Tzedek says that the chiyuv of his father to be masi his daughter, to lahassi his b'noisei, shegiu lepirkon, alachas kama v'kama, they've already passed it. The mitzvah is even more so after than before. Question is, that means the chiyuv? Yeah, you're going to see chiyuv for boys also. It's a different kind of chiyuv, but it's also there. What happens if there's no grandfather? Does the obligation fall on the mother or not? The Ritva says if the father doesn't have assets, the mother does. The obligation applies to father and mother equally. Same thing is written also in Ma'aser Keach. The Maharil in his Tshuvas writes that there is no chiyuv on the mother. Same thing is in Avnei Miluim. There's no chiyuv on the mother. The chiyuv is only on the father. The Marashdam and Siman Kuf Tzadik Dalet says that on other relatives, that's not the father, not the mother, not the grandfather, there is no chiyuv, but there is a mitzvah. The Bach, the same Bach who says you koy for the father, and Ois Bey says that the Bezdin could be koy for any rich relative to fork out money for this girl's wedding, and the Beis Hillel on the Shulchan Aruch says that this minhag that you koy for any rich relative to a girl to be able to marry her off is a minhag that a noeg in all batidin. So Beis Hillel writes, talking about over 100 years ago. This is about giving money to a girl. And then we said that's the minimum amount is for the 12 months. If the person is rich, is kefi ashrei. There's a discussion if the Bach, when he says you koy for the father, does that mean for the minimum, or does that mean if he's asher kefi ashrei or not? Some are very machlekes and achreinim what it means. If it's a kfiyah happens, most people say you koy, but most people agree with the Bach that you koy for the father. The question is, are you koy for kefi ashrei? That's a different discussion. Some say that you koy for even kefi ashrei. Some say that the kefi ashrei is not a chiyuv, but it is a mitzvah. You look in the Siman, it doesn't say there's an obligation for the father to pay for his son to get married. The point is, does not need to write it over here because there's a mitzvah on the father. The Rebbe says that it's part of the mitzvah of Shinantum Levanecha. It's a Gemara that says a chiyuv on the Kiddushin, chiyuv on the father to do a bris, to livdaisoi, to teach him Torah, lahasii isha, and to marry him off. And there's a letter from the Rebbe in Chelik Yud Aleph, and the letter is Gimel Taf Reish Yud Daled. That's the number of the letter. But the Rebbe is writing over there to a Yerushalmi Jew, was telling the Rebbe he can't think about shidduchim for his son because he doesn't have a couple thousand liras to be able to get to arrange for the son to be able to get married. And the Rebbe first says it's worth it to go into chayvus for that. Why? And the Rebbe says because this to marry off your son is part of the mitzvah of Shinantam. And the Rebbe says in Yerushalayim, even the poorest people are marrying off their sons and their daughters without having all the thousands of liras that you're worried about. And not only that, they still try that their kids, they work hard so their sons should remain in the Halash al Torah after the marriage. And the Rebbe says the reason that you're trying to push it off is only atzas hayetzer. Now it's very interesting. The Rebbe says that they stay in the Halash al Torah and the parents work. That means to pay for the sons to be in koilel. Happens to be that the Alter Rebbe writes that clearly in Hilchos Talmud Torah. And Hilchos Talmud Torah is very interesting. Halacha from the Alter Rebbe is more machmir than the rest of the paskim. In Perek Aleph Halacha Zayin, father has an obligation to pay all the expenses of his son's study of Torah, not only schar limud, but also all other expenses that are connected to it. His medical, food, everything else that's connected to the learning of the son. If he's not in the house, he's going to learn somewhere else. Aside for tuition, also has to pay all the other expenses. There is a chiyuv, and even koife to do such a thing. And it says, if the Alter Rebbe continues in this halacha zayin, that if his son is novoin umaskil yoser, a very bright son, and he's already married with a daughter, with a wife, and even with kids, there's a mitzvah on the father to pay for him that he should not have rechaim al tzavarei, and he should be oisek b'Torah. So Alter Rebbe puts it right in the list of you pay for education expenses, pay for all expenses related to education. How many years? If a son is not so smart, only up to a certain amount of time. If a son is very smart, even after marriage and after kids, the father should continue paying. It's no longer a chiyuv, it's a mitzvah. And the Alter Rebbe says, even though according to halacha you could use meiser for this, he says it's better not to use meiser or chaimish for these expenses because it's not part of the cheshbon that the Eibishter gives you in the beginning of the year. And why play around with the Eibishter? If you're not going to use it from the meiser, then the next year it's going to come the cheshbon, the Eibishter is going to give you a lot more. The meiser, so now what is about the son? We went a little bit off topic over here, that it's a mitzvah to marry off your son, therefore you have to give him money. Yeah, we said it's a mitzvah. We don't know what does it mean to give him. So the Raivan says that it's a mitzvah to give him. It doesn't say how much. The Maharit in Chelik Beis says, Chelik Beis in Chav Zayin says, that not only do you have to give your son, buying jewelry for your son's kala is included in this chiyuv. The same chiyuv that there is to pay for your son to get married, whatever he needs, is also a chiyuv on the father to buy some jewelry for the kala of his son. The Maram Mintz says in סימן Lamed Aleph that you might think the Shulchan Aruch didn't mention the obligation to the son that he should have clothing, only mentions the obligation to the daughter, and therefore you would think you get away with giving less. You should know if you're going to give your son less than what you give your daughters, you have to put them in a nidui. So the Maram Mintz says. The Avnei Miluim says it's asur to give to the son less than what's given to the daughters. And the only reason the Shulchan Aruch mentions the daughters is because the son is a chiyuv, which is already mentioned elsewhere. That you have to marry him off. Over here, it basically tells you have to give to your daughter also. That means that your daughter should get like the sons, not that she should get more than the sons. The Ezer Mikodesh says that even if the son is no longer living at home and he's working or is not anymore at home, the father still has to pay for the expenses connected to the wedding. However, that only applies for a zivug rishon. The Shas Tshuvas Ginas V'rodim, a very famous Shas Tshuvas, Father Shas Tshuvas says that the moment that it already becomes a zivug sheni, this obligation, both for the father, both for the son, and for the daughters, this obligation only applies to zivug rishon. Applies to zivug rishon even if it's past the stage of the earliest date that they have to, even if it's past the earliest age that they have to get married. And for the daughter, it applies even, and for either of them, it applies even after. Only for the zivug rishon, does not apply for zivug shein. Now, what you mentioned to me before, Levi, I'm just going to find the Maramokim from the Tzemach Tzedek. One second. It's an Even Ezer Siman Kuf Mem Beis. Tzemach Tzedek. Over here, the Tzemach Tzedek learns from the Gemara in Sanhedrin that Biter Samuch Lepirka Mitzvah L'Asiyah Mikol Shekein Acher Pirka. For sure, afterwards, he brings it based on the Gemara. Yeah, and with that we will conclude today's shir. I'm going to go into סימן Samach Aleph on Tuesday in Yirtzeh Hashem.